If I'm being honest, I don't know what the next phase or next season of my life is going to look like. I don't know what my career is going to look like. I don't know. And if I'm really going to be honest, this is the most humbling and frustrating experience in this season because I really just truly don't know. I'm having to lean on God for like my next steps and for instruction instead of having to plan and instead of having to find all the answers out myself. I'm not a go with the flow type of girl either, so this is really adding an extra layer of frustration. Now, before I really get into the nitty gritty of this diary post, I want to, set the tone for the Diary of a Sidequester, the audio and visual extension. Now, this is the only blurb that's going to be pre-written in terms of like a script, but I really want to set the tone properly and I want to make sure that my thoughts are portrayed accurately. So, before we get into it, I want to set the tone for what this podcast actually is. This is not a produced show. There are no scripts, no pre planned talking points, no researched answers waiting in my notes. This is literally just me thinking out loud and letting you see it in hopes that you resonate with it and that, you know, it does something for you. The way I find scripture is the same way it happens in real life. Mid thought, mid confusion, sometimes mid sentence. If I have to look something up while we're here, that's not a flaw. That's just the diary. And speaking of the diary, the podcast is the audio and visual extension of the Diary of a Sidequester. That's my Substack publication where I've been writing in real time since about 2 months ago. 8 essays already live, all of them documenting the same story you're about to hear. A forced transition out of financial consulting, a year and a half in the classroom that cost me more than I expected, a body that kept score while I kept showing up, and a life being built from scratch with God and not away from Him. If you want the written version of everything that came before this episode, it's all on Substack. The link is in the show notes. But if you're starting here, you're not behind. The story is still being written, and this is just a different way of watching it unfold. Psalm chapter 107, verse 2 says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story." This is me telling mine out loud in real time before I know how it ends. So let's go. Now, as someone who has been in education for the last year and a half, I honestly thought that I was going to kind of settle into education. It seemed like God didn't want me to run a business anymore when He forcibly transitioned me outside of financial consulting. And as soon as I said, I don't, no, as soon as I said that I'm going to do this or I can see myself doing this for at least 5 years, that is when everything started to fall apart in this, season that He had me in. First of all, I had to fight to get my way here, or at least get into a teaching role because the first half, the first half of the year, let's say 2024, I was a long-term substitute in a business teaching role, and the lady who was in charge of allowing teachers to get into, their roles, she just had a problem with me for whatever freaking reason. Then I end up transitioning to a different school district, and let's say, for example, I applied for the job on Friday. By Wednesday, I had the interview. By Wednesday afternoon, I was told that I was going to get the job, but I had to wait because the job wasn't posted long enough, and everything started settling. But I had to finish my degree, and then I went to get another degree, on top of getting my teaching certification, which had me, going through a certification program for, my entire last year. And it took a lot for me to get here. And then now all of a sudden I'm saying, oh, this isn't something that I'm going to be doing anymore because my nervous system took a hit. And I honestly don't think that how I'm wired, I belong in the education system. Now, I'm someone who loves education. I love learning. I love teaching. But just because you love doing something doesn't mean that what your gift is automatically aligns to what the career field is. So, for example, if teaching is my gift, doesn't necessarily mean I have to be a teacher in the public education. And that is something that I've learned. And so while I was trying to figure out what my next steps were going to be, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll go back into business again because it seems as though that's where I was being pushed. This past year, I was teaching 9 different business curriculums. I really love business. I love the idea of being able to run it, being able to build something from scratch, and being able to see the fruits of your labor. And I stumbled upon, implementation consulting. I am someone who's great at implementation. As soon as I get an idea, I put it together and I implement it as soon as possible. And I'm really great at building systems because, as someone who had 9 different curriculums I was responsible for this year, there was no way that I could teach 9 different curriculums without a system. I had hardly any help. I had no curriculum really to go off of. Outside of like a pacing guide, I had to like come up with a lot of things from scratch because even the things that were available in terms of like resources, they were outdated. Like they were, like, for example, one of my classes was social media marketing, and one of the modules was talking about MySpace. How many years ago has MySpace been gone? How many years? Please. So I had to literally come up with a lot of things from scratch, and I really enjoyed it because I created systems that allowed my students to have hands-on experience in the classroom. I ran my classrooms as if they were business departments based off the subjects that I was teaching. So one of my class periods was stacked with social media marketing, advertising, and then social media marketing and advanced marketing. And then social media marketing came after advertising. So I had 3 classes in one period. And I started implementing, departments in classrooms so that students had their own autonomy over their education. They got hands-on experience, and I was able to have some breathing room. But I was trying to figure out, okay, well, I'm really good at doing these things. Let me go ahead and build out this business. I did. I built out the website. I built out my systems, my contracts, my outreach AI agents. Like I did all the things that I needed to do. And as soon as I was getting ready to pull the trigger to start reaching out to clients, there was like this mental friction that I started to get. And I'm like, okay, God, what is it exactly that you want me to do? Because you said the season of my life is ending, which is teaching. Teaching had to go. I got confirmations every other day about teaching not being my long-term thing. Cool. I started going back into building a business, but instead of financial consulting, I was going to do implementation consulting for corporate. And as soon as I built out the business, like I'm ready to go, now I have mental friction. And I wrote about this, I believe, I don't remember which volume it was in Substack, but how I was talking about when I know God doesn't want me to do something, my brain kind of feels like it's being scrambled. And I liken it to the Tower of Babel. And it was like every time I'm doing something that he isn't calling me to do, there is a mental friction, there is a confusion, there is a blockage that sets me back to where he told me to be, which is currently documenting and finding my voice. And I'm like, okay, I understand. I have until September pretty much to figure out what my next steps are going to be, because I signed up for a 13-month pay contract, which means my last paycheck is going to be at the end of August, and it'll take me all the way until September. And although that's great and I have a little bit of wiggle room, the idea of me still not knowing what my next steps are is frustrating. And although I'm sure that he has put me on this path to document and find my voice again, because there is something that's going to come out of it, the idea of me still not knowing is irritating. There's no other way I can put it. It's irritating. I am someone who's wired to want to know all of the details, and God is not giving me that in this season. So I'm having to really put myself in this position where I have no choice but to depend on him. And I believe that is why he's not giving me a little bit of hints, or excuse me, he's not giving me, an idea of where he wants me to go, because as soon as I have an idea, I'm going to jump the gun, get ahead of him, and start implementing things that he didn't tell me to implement. And I understand it. I really do. It's just I don't I don't like this unknowing. Um but I also understand too that because I had to be in control a lot, it put me in situations that I shouldn't have put myself in if I was literally following the direction that God was giving me and only doing what God told me to do. And I wrote about this a little bit in Substack too, because one day I asked God how he saw me. And I had took a quiz and it told me like my spiritual archetype or something was Esther. And when I read Esther, even though her story was phenomenal, she was built for a time such as this, like that was her theme, that didn't resonate with me. So as soon as I finished reading that story, I'm like, God, this doesn't sound right. How do you really see me? And Sarah dropped into my spirit. And I'm like, Sarah, what do you mean? Like, Sarah, she doesn't have her own book, but her story is very profound because she is the mother of a nation. She was literally barren and was told that she was going to give birth. Her son was going to be pretty much Isaac, or not pretty much, but her son was Isaac. But when I read Sarah's story in detail, I said, "Oh, okay, God, I see how you see me as Sarah, because yes, she did become the mother of a nation. God did fulfill His promise, but Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands because she didn't believe truly what God was saying, and she created a problem for herself, which was Ishmael. And if I'm looking at my own story, because God told me, I believe from a young age, God has placed business ownership on my heart. Like, there is nothing else I've wanted to do my entire life except for run a business. Now, the businesses have changed, but everything has always come back down to business. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, I know a little bit of this, I know a little bit of that. Let me go ahead and make a business out of it. And that finance chick, my financial consulting business, became my Ishmael. And although it wasn't something that God told me to do, he still was able to use it to help other people, but it still caused me a lot of problems. When Sarah gave her maid to Abraham to give him a son, she created an Ishmael. She created jealousy and a lot of friction in her home, because she did something that God told her that she wasn't supposed to do, or she did something that God didn't instruct her to do. And although God ended up still using Ishmael, Sarah created problems for herself. So then when I go back to my story and I'm like, okay, well, now that I'm out of teaching, because now that I understand that teaching wasn't the long-term thing that God told me to do, this was more so my provision as he was refining me and pushing me to like whatever next step that he wants me to be. I'm thinking, okay, well, now going into implementation consulting makes sense because I can make really good money. It naturally uses the gifts that I have. I can implement things really quickly, and I can look at systems and be like, oh, this is broken here, here, and here, and this is how I can fix it and go about my business. And it fits my personality a lot more. And while building it, I'm realizing, oh, I might be in the middle of creating another Ishmael. Yes, God could potentially use it for, the good of people, but ultimately it might put me in a situation where it's causing me more problems than good. Yes, I could make good money, but is it going to align with what I told I wanted God for my, or is it going to align with what I told God I wanted for my life? And is it going to align with what God wants for my life? And that's the thing. So in the season of finding my voice, I'm also learning how to slow down, and stay dependent on God for my next steps. It's hard to do, and I understand the reason why he has me doing it, but it's irritating. That's the best way I can explain it, because it's going against my natural grain of wanting to be in control of all of the things. And if we are fully depending on God, you can't control anything. Like, you control nothing. I control nothing. And I'm also realizing too, because I was like, oh, well, since God has me, you know, documenting my story as it unfolds, I'm literally in the middle of it. Maybe I should go ahead and like start my social media pages over from scratch. But then I'm like, I'm realizing, no, I would again create another level of friction for myself, because there are people who follow me, and there are people who I've had genuine conversations with, whether they were clients or in my DMs, and they need somebody who's documenting the middle, because a lot of the women that I've spoken to were always in the middle. That's why we were having our financial consulting calls. That's why we were having our DM conversations. They needed something while they were in the middle. They needed a blueprint. And I wish I had a blueprint of, this current season that I'm in, but there isn't one that I can find. And the more I sit with my thoughts and I think about, my next steps, I believe one of the things that I'm being called to do is provide a blueprint for the middle, for women who are transitioning, don't know what they want to do, or I don't know. I think this documenting that middle is providing a blueprint for a lot of people to know that even though you've come a long way and you still have a long way to go, God's still not going to leave you in the middle. You might not know what his next steps are, but as long as you are following his instruction, it's all going to work out for your good. And I think because our stories are not our own, if we were obedient and showcased our story, or we told our story the way that God wanted us to do it, his kingdom would be a lot further along if people were obedient to tell their stories. We are literal walking gospels. We might not have our own book in the Bible, but our story is a gospel for somebody else. And until people are able to be comfortable in leaning on God and fully depending on him, showcasing our journey with following God and depending on him is something that will allow us, and me in this case, to plant seeds of people, to plant seeds for people to build a better relationship with God himself. And the more and more I think about how I'm in this season of having to find my voice again, if I go back to my younger self, I realize how much my voice has been like diminished and attacked, because I felt like people misunderstood me, and it also seemed like a lot of people misunderstood me on purpose. um, I used to be someone who was super headstrong. Like, I didn't care what you thought about me. I didn't care what you said about me. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. If it was placed on my mind, I'm going to do it. Nobody can stop me. It would only take an act of God to stop me once I made up my mind. But as time went on and I integrated myself into groups of people who were not my people and who didn't understand me and who were looking at me through lenses of their own limitations, their own self-doubts, their own insecurities, plus their limited perception of me, I think I got beat down to the point where I believed that if enough people said it, obviously it must be true. And although some things can be true of what I've been told my entire life, why would I believe people about me when there are groups of people who can be loud and wrong on the internet have the information at their fingertips and still not do the research? Why would I believe people like that about me? You have limited information about me. You don't know how I think. You don't know my inner thoughts. Why would I allow people like that to continue to diminish this voice that I have? Again, I don't know the reason why God is directing me to find my voice again. I don't know where it's going to go in terms of career, and I might be thinking too shallow. Maybe it has nothing to do with my career. Maybe it has something to do with the higher calling that He has for my life. Who knows? I don't know. But what I do know, if I'm looking back at my life, there are a lot of things that have diminished who I was as a person. And now that I'm 33 years old, I'm slowly getting back to who I was as a person and understanding now that I can't go back to putting myself in boxes because there are people who are attached to your name or attached to my name. And the last thing I want is for God to look at me and say, you didn't do what I told you to do. And because of that, these people are all on your hands. These people needed your story. And because you were shy, because you weren't comfortable, you decided to disobey me. And this person got hurt. This person was led astray. This person decided to give up on me altogether. And although I'm uncomfortable in this moment because I'm unsure what the next steps are, I'm unsure what God is going to do, I'm having to be vulnerable with God knows who's watching me on the internet. I have no choice. Well, I do, but I'm not giving myself a choice. I'm going to embrace this journey that He has me on with my documentation. My life is me just going side quest to side quest because God doesn't have me anywhere permanently. Every time I get comfortable in something, my goodness, He's always flipping the script on he's always flipping the script. I'll just say that. Um, so yeah, I don't know what the next steps are. It's not my job to know. It's not my business to know right now. And I just have to leave it at that. This podcast is going to be a lot of me talking about the things that I don't know, but I'm doing things. I'm building forward. I'm failing forward. And at first, I wanted so much to shrink into a box because I didn't want to deal with the criticism. I don't want to deal with the criticism that may come from this at some point. But the only people who are going to criticize me are the people who aren't doing what they're supposed to do with their own lives. And since when is it cringe to try? Since when is it okay to stay mediocre when you have these God-given gifts on the inside of you? You have a voice that's meant to be heard. You have a gift that's meant to be shared. You have something that's meant to be taught. It's almost a slap in God's face to remain the same when He's giving you everything that you need to represent His kingdom properly. I think I'm going to leave it here for now. I think there's another thought forming that's not complete yet, but I believe I might be onto something a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. But that is my thought for the day. That is my diary entry for the Diary of a Sidequester. And I look forward to sharing my thoughts later on.